Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast series focusing on critical business decisions. Brought to you by Brady Ware & Company. Brady Ware is a regional, full-service accounting and advisory firm that helps businesses and entrepreneurs make visions a reality.
And welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast giving you, the listener, clear vision to make great decisions. In each episode, we discuss the process of decision-making on a different topic from the business owner's or executive's perspective. We aren't necessarily telling you what to do, but we can put you in a position to make an informed decision on your own and understand when you might need help along the way. My name is Mike Blake, and I'm your host for today's program. I'm a director at Brady Ware & Company, a full-service accounting firm based in Dayton, Ohio, with offices in Dayton, Columbus, Ohio, Richmond, Indiana, and Alpharetta, Georgia. Brady Ware is sponsoring this podcast, which is being recorded in Atlanta per social distancing protocols. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast aggregator, and please consider leaving a review of the podcast as well. Today's topic is, should I become a servant leader? And we'll get into definitions in a moment, but you know, as we record this on July 31st, which means it'll probably show up sometime around Labor Day if our current publishing schedule holds, I think we're being confronted right now with the notion of servant leadership every day, and I don't want to make this a political discussion. In fact, it's not going to be a political discussion if I have anything to say about it. But nevertheless, we're being confronted right now with, in particular in the private sector, so what is the role of the company in society? And, you know, the notion of shareholder primacy in the company, the thesis of why a company should exist, meaning that companies exist to provide return for shareholders, financial return to shareholders, full stop, period, end of discussion, is now, I think, being widely challenged. And there's been a challenge to it, I think, that's been bubbling up the last 10 years as millennials come of age and start to become not only highly sought after employees and contributors to companies and organizations, but now are becoming executives and owners of organizations. And by the way, if you want to feel old, have the kid of one of your friends ask to connect with you on LinkedIn. I don't think anything has made me feel older. And I turned 50 a couple months ago. That was not as devastating as the kid of one of my peers connected with me on LinkedIn. Not Facebook, not Instagram, but on LinkedIn. That was jarring. But at any rate, the notion of what leadership is right now, I think, is being redefined in real time, or at least is being re-examined on a society and an economy-wide level in real time. Now, does that mean that everybody's going to change? No, I don't think so. Does that mean I think our entire society is going to be upended, and we're going to move from whatever dominant leadership style we think we have? I think it's actually fragmented. But whatever leadership style you think prevails in society, is that going to be converted wholesale into something else? No, I don't. But I do think what's happening is that alternative leadership approaches are necessarily being given a second look, for no other reason, because with the exception of close family and friends, this is assuming that you're in the camp that thinks that social distancing is important. And again, if it's not important to you, okay, but be safe. But for those of us for whom it is important, it means that almost every relationship we have, especially business relationship, has been disrupted. It is harder to sell. It is harder to hire, to recruit, to train, to motivate, to inspire. And the one thing that I think we know for certain is that what worked and what we were comfortable with on January 31st, 2020 is not going to be the same thing that we need to be comfortable with and effective on July 31st, 2020. And so that's why I think this topic is of particular of particular interest and is timely today. And joining us today is a person that I think is a terrific example of a servant leader, and is a person who's going to tell you through his own story didn't necessarily come out of the chute as a servant leader. That there's an origin story there that I think we're all gonna benefit from, because if we didn't consider ourselves servant leaders, or maybe even we're not even familiar with the term until very recently, it's not too late to become that if that resonates with the kind of leader that you want to be and you need to be, given the new environment that may or may not return to what we enjoyed again about a half a year ago. So joining us today is Mark Bachmann, who is partner at McCracken Alliance Partners, and they're focused on providing financial leadership services, including full-time or interim CFOs, as well as experienced professionals to lead critical strategic initiatives or transactions. MAP is comprised of experienced public and private company CFOs whose skills and knowledge can create immediate value. Additionally, some of the partners are experienced executive coaches providing relevant, actionable counsel to existing chief financial officers. Mark has a broad business background, including both division president and CFO of a public company. He's currently, as I said, a partner with McCracken Alliance Partners, and he's also an executive coach to chief financial officers to help them accelerate their performance. Mark demonstrates strong business acumen with solid conceptual and analytical thinking to lead enterprise critical initiatives. He is a highly effective, trusted advisor in working with CEOs, boards, senior management teams, and strategic partners with a collaborative and participatory management style, calm and stable influence, and sharp focus on value creation and organizational integrity. Mark is currently serving on the board of trustees, treasurer, and on the development and endowment committees of his religious institution. He serves on the operating committee and is the immediate past president of CEO Netweavers, of which I'm a member and how we know each other, a not-for-profit professional organization in Atlanta, as well as on the Leadership Council for Junior Achievement of Atlanta. Mark earned his Bachelor of Science degree in accounting from the University of Illinois and his MBA from Northwestern University. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. You did a nice job there. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Well, I hope I got the right bio, because otherwise we'll have to record this again. Given the accounting industry, I'd be remiss. You don't want a job as a tax accountant right now, do you?
I did that for one busy season, and that was enough many years ago.
That's enough for a lot of people. I thank goodness that I am not an accountant, even though I work for an accounting firm. But seeing how people go through busy season, and then this year where it basically got dragged out through July. They are better people than I am. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. I don't even do my own taxes anymore. So
there you go, and neither do I. That's why I'm not in jail. So, Mark, let's start with a basic definition, because I don't think everybody necessarily knows what the term servant leadership means. How would you define it?
Well, so I think the phrase servant leadership probably goes back to the early 1970s when a gentleman by the name of Robert Greenleaf wrote an essay entitled "The Servant is Leader." I think he goes on to say that, it's a philosophy and a set of practices that enriches the lives of individuals and builds better organizations. But it's really the focus that the servant leader is servant first, and they want to serve and serve first. And that's sharply different than a leader who considers them, a leader first, perhaps maybe a need to, meet a power drive or to acquire material possessions. I've also, it's not quite the same, but I've also sort of thought of it as being similar as paying it forward. I mean, where, you're doing good for someone else without the expectation of anything in return.
So how would you characterize servant leadership in contrast to other kinds of leadership? And that's a semi-unfair question, but assuming you even can put names in other kinds of leadership, how does it differ?
Well, I mean, as you said there, Mike, there are a lot of different styles of leadership, whether someone might be considered an autocratic type of leader, and we can think of people like that, or, authoritarian in their approach. But I think, it depends sort of on how you think about sharing of power and how decisions are made, and whether you're thinking yourself of being that leader first or servant first. It's sort of I think the servant leader shares power and puts the needs of others first and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible, as opposed to maybe other forms of leadership where, you're thinking you're the most important person in the room, and you're driven by that power, or that ego.
And why is servant leadership effective? Why is that mentality of kind of working outside in, if you will, if you think of an egocentric thought process? Why or what are the benefits of that kind of approach?
Well, I mean, I think some would say that you're getting greater engagement of the people who are in your organization, whether it's a for-profit or non-for-profit, that if you're thinking of them first and trying to serve them first, that you're getting a greater engagement. You're getting then, greater creativity, enthusiasm. You probably are going to end up with lower turnover. And so the thought is, if you have an engaged group, as opposed to, maybe a style where you're telling and dictating what shall be done and not giving a lot of leeway for ideas or voices to be heard, once again, I think different situations also call for different leadership. I don't necessarily think that, one style is necessarily right for all situations either.
That's an interesting point. I got to think about it. That's a very thought-provoking comment, but I think you're right that servant leadership may not necessarily be optimal in every situation.
Well, think about it this way. I mean, would you say that the military is a servant leadership organization?
I would say only partially, and I say that because one of my favorite leadership books is a book called "It's Your Ship," by a former Navy captain named Michael Abramoff, and I thought that there were instances of servant leadership in terms of team building and loyalty and unit cohesion. But I think I see where you're getting at in a combat scenario. You can only throw yourself on a grenade once, right? And so that it may not be practical in a combat scenario to embrace a servant leadership kind of mentality.
Right.
So I'd like to hear your origin story. We've sort of chatted about it in passing, but even I don't know the details. But tell us about what led you to a servant leadership mentality.
Well, honestly, I went through the majority of my career without ever hearing the word servant leadership or really knowing what it was. If I look back over my 35 plus years of being in business, and primarily in large public corporations, I worked for probably over 20 different managers. Some were pretty good. Others, frankly, were pretty bad. Through that, I developed my own leadership style, probably more closely aligned with what might be referred to as a democratic style. I would frequently ask, people, what do you think, and seek people's opinions before, reaching a final decision. And I enjoyed, as I went up through the ranks, the increased responsibility. But honestly, I don't think I was personally driven by power or ego. I was just trying to do what was best for the organization. And as I became a manager of people, I wanted to help them become the best they could be. I was interested in their development and providing feedback and mentoring them as they progressed. And what were their goals and how could I help achieve them. And, honestly, I would have conversations with people, and if they wanted to pursue and sort of leave my group and go to another part of the organization or even leave the organization, I would say, fine, helping them be their best, if you will. So that was sort of always at the core of sort of what I thought was right. But it's really been since I've retired from a full-time position that I've increased my focus and frankly became aware of servant leadership. I really felt blessed to have achieved both the personal and professional success and accomplishments that I wanted to give back. I mean, really help others. I found this organization that you mentioned that we're both members of, CEO Netweavers. For our listeners, it's a group of current and former CEOs along with a select group of trusted advisors and C-suite executives. And the organization is based on the principles of servant leadership, and we provide service to our members by trying to help them achieve their goals and aspirations, as well as serving the community through a few of the outreach programs. And so, as I got to know this organization, and we both know Jim Dupree, and I want to thank him. He's one of the founders of the group, and he encouraged me to get involved. And so I first got, involved by leading the mentoring program there. And then he asked if I would become treasurer. And so I became treasurer. And then I had the privilege of last year being its president. And now I lead the governance nominating committee. So, I really saw that as a great vehicle to be with other like-minded professionals who really want to give and really not having an expectation of anything in return. And really that was my introduction to servant leadership and really has been very rewarding.
Well, and you mentioned CEO Netweavers. I don't mind giving them a shameless plug. It is the only civic organization to which I belong. And there's good reason for it, that you learn so much there, and there is a camaraderie, and the agenda of every meeting is how can we help somebody else in some form or another. And if you're into that, we also have a chapter in Houston. It is a terrific organization that's a focus for that. And, hopefully over time there'll be more of them, because it is such a great focus, not just to exercise servant leadership, but how to become better at it. So let me, you mentioned you came to servant leadership kind of as you retire, but let's take a listener that is not retired. Let's take a listener that's in the middle of their career, is doing what they're doing. A cynic might say, well, you can't afford to be a servant leadership. You got to grab what you can when you can, because once that opportunity is over, it's over. And my question to you is, in your experience, for somebody that is, again, at that stage of their career, are they potentially giving something up in exchange for adopting a servant leadership mentality, maybe just because they feel it's spiritually rewarding or just makes their life feel more purposeful, whatever it is? Or is that a false choice?
Well, I'm not sure that it's a false choice and that you're giving things up. I mean, I think, once again, it's how are you choosing to lead and whose interests are you motivated by, and while trying to, and your lead in, and I'm sure we'll probably get to it, around shareholder value and the role of the corporation. I mean, in business, you have a set of objectives. The organization has a set of objectives, and there's many ways and how do you try to align people to accomplish those objectives. And I think, servant leadership is just trying to shift the power, shift the focus a little bit on how you try to execute And so, if people are unable to, um, drive success through that, or feel like they have to have a more command and control to ensure success, they'll fight with, letting go a bit and shifting the focus, I'm sure, but I don't know that it's necessarily a trade-off for everyone.
Well, I did want to cover exactly that question as to whether, as how servant leadership and shareholder value creation, whether they can coexist, and if so, what does that look like? So, you're a finance guy. You're a guy that is used to making hard-nosed decisions. You've been in a leadership role in a public company. I'm sure you've had your compensation tied very clearly to stock performance. So I think you're in a great position to offer an informed point of view on this. Can servant leadership and a shareholder value mentality coexist?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Being a servant leader doesn't mean you don't care about creating shareholder value. Last year, I think it was the Business Roundtable announced a new statement of what the purpose of a corporation was. And, previously it was solely to maximize shareholder value. But, I think they got over 150 or 70 CEOs who committed to lead their companies for the benefit of all stakeholders. And so they include customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. And, so there's clearly, and they had a section I was reading about the employee where, they're talking about investing in our employees, and they say it starts with compensating them fairly and providing them important benefits. It also includes supporting them through training and education so they develop new skills and that they foster diversity, inclusion, dignity, and respect. Now, when I take it to my own perspective, having to make those trade-offs, I learned an incredibly valuable lesson when I was the division president of Zepp's retail business. We had a huge opportunity to launch a whole new product line at Walmart, and we had 40 days to do it. And as a result, I pushed the organization really hard. And I placed so much focus on the customer that I lost sight of the employee. You're talking about the largest retailer in the world. Yep. You have this opportunity and you have 40 days to get it done. As a result, our employees launched a union organizing campaign. And so I invested a considerable amount of time to listen to our employees' concerns and was able to build trust with them that, they thought I would have learned from this and would address it. And so we ended up defeating the union 2-1, which was, fabulous. And I made a lot of changes. And ever since, I consciously have balanced the need of multiple stakeholders, that, being skewed towards the customer or the shareholder at the expense of the employee, what wasn't the right formula for success. And I guess the last thing I'd say, Mike, is I know that there have been studies out there that have shown a positive correlation between employee engagement and shareholder returns. And, when you had engaged employees, you'll improve retention, thereby reducing turnover. And, it doesn't necessarily mean you have an organization has a whole bunch of servant leaders, in there, but they're clearly, if you have an engaged workforce, if you think about, these surveys like Great Places to Work or whatever, I'm sure there's a much greater understanding of the needs of the employees than just the shareholders.
I wonder if that scenario that you described matches up with one of the concepts in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where there's this notion of, in effect, an emotional bank account, right? You have a you have a particular goal where in order to accomplish a goal, in your case, in 40 days, you just have to go into a flat out sprint. If your knees hurt, you're out of breath, your feet hurt, too bad. You just got to figure it out. Failure is really if it's a if not a non-option, it's certainly a bad option. If there'd been maybe some sort of capital in the emotional bank account before that, right? Then maybe driving for that sprint then becomes a little bit easier, right? So it's not just about it's not just about kind of doing the right thing in the moment, but also I think it's building capital where you're kind of the first to give, so that when you're asking somebody to give in return, they have a sense that it's a relationship with some semblance of equity to it.
Yeah. No, I absolutely believe that you need to build, goodwill. You need to have, as a leader, you need to have emotional intelligence, EQ, as well as IQ, in terms of being able to motivate your workforce, understand what their needs are, so that in these times you could tap on them, ask them to go sort of all out.
So as you decided that you wanted to embrace servant leadership, were there any new skills that you felt like you had to either acquire or develop further in order to be effective in that kind of mode?
Well, I mean, I think I'm not sure that there are new skills per se, but if I think about some of the key skills that are important in servant leadership, so you might then tune them up or continue to be more aware. I mean, you really first and foremost, it's all about listening. You really need to understand that you're going to understand what the needs of others are. What are they truly saying? What are they truly needing in that? I think also, a healthy understanding of yourself, self-awareness, to really understand how you are managing your emotions, your behaviors, and how what you do might impact others. And then, having a commitment that you want to help other people grow and develop. I think those are all sort of important, and sort of checking in, on your ability to persuade rather than sort of using authority to get that. And I will tell you, that's been a really key learning for me working in nonprofit and volunteer organizations, right? On the operating committee of CEO Netweavers, or on my synagogue board. I don't necessarily have the authority, but I need to encourage people, and I'm trying to sell an idea or whatever, and having other people, follow. It's leadership is also creating followership, right? And so having aspiring to those people's interests and inclinations.
So I'd like to share with you at least a couple of things I think I've had to develop to become a more effective servant leader, and one of those two things is proactivity. I think a lot of leadership, and even your description of the 40-day dash and the unionization, I think, is actually somewhat illustrative of this. Is that I think a major characteristic of servant leadership is being proactive and addressing or trying to address people's needs or wants before they're ever even articulated to you. And I have a feeling anybody who's been married understands the value of this, that a bouquet of flowers before your spouse gets mad at you is often much more effective than a bouquet of flowers afterwards, right?
Yes.
And I think that's sort of human nature, and something that a skill that I am not naturally good at. I tend to be a reactive person. But being it is, I think it's very hard to be an effective servant leader if you're purely reactive, because that misses so many opportunities to exhibit that kind of leadership.
Right. I'd agree.
And I think the other mentality is I had to give up an external need for validation. That servant leadership, I think, often is best applied when it's not noticed. And I kind of think of it like being an umpire in a baseball game. The best umpire in a baseball game is one you don't even notice is there, but you just know that the game went well. You think the right team won the game, and that's it. But you never say, you know what, that guy did a really great job calling balls and strikes that day. Good on him. And I think servant leadership requires that, and that requires, I think, subverting your ego a little bit, and requires developing an inner source of validation where you say, you know what, I did good today. I don't need to have a thank you note. I don't need to have a trophy or anything like that. I'm just going to open a nice bottle of Cabernet at the end of the day and just enjoy the fact that somebody else had a positive impact because of something that I did.
No, I absolutely agree with that.
So let me ask this. I'm curious. Is there somebody that you look up to as an example of servant leadership, and if so, what is it about them that makes you put them in the position of sort of serving as a good example for you?
I don't know that I have, one example or whatever of being a servant leader. I mean, I think, there's been certainly, a lot of footage and coverage over the last couple of weeks about John Lewis and, a civil rights leader and what he was trying to do. And he seemed to, he seemed like he was a servant leader, really trying to, meet the needs of others than himself. But I don't know, when I look at, others out there, I mean, I can't say I have a role model that I'm following.
Okay, well, that's fair. I mean, and you don't necessarily have to. I think in the mainstream, the concept of servant leadership is still relatively new. And I think there are lots of people that behave as servant leaders, even though I don't think they would necessarily characterize themselves that way. But you certainly see it kind of out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we both know, I don't know if he's been on your show or not, but Tom Berger, who's a member of CEO Netweavers. I mean, talk about selflessness and just what the amount of knowledge and what he's willing to do to share with people and help others. I mean, I'm inspired by a lot of our other members in CEO Netweavers.
Let me ask you this: one a person who's often held up as the archetypal servant leader is Martin Luther King Jr. And we know who he is because he was effective at promoting a grand cause. You could easily argue maybe the grandest, at least domestic cause in the United States in the 20th century. But do you have to be promoting a grand cause to be a servant leader? I don't. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as I observe you in the way that you carry yourself every day, it's not obvious to me that you necessarily have a grand cause other than to serve. Um, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'd love you to tell me I'm either right or wrong. And the question is, do I have to have some grand cause, some grand vision to be a servant leader, or can that mentality be effective as simply as saying, I'm gonna try to do what I can to make my corner of existence a little bit better one day at a time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't have a grand cause. And I do, as I said, now I'm in the enviable position of largely being able to decide how I spend my time and with whom and doing what. And so, but I believe servant leadership can be done on a one-on-one basis. And once again, the more people you can affect in a positive way and help them, the hope is that they will pay it forward and adopt some of those same behaviors and traits and help others. And so I do think, there's some merit to what, Greenleaf, wrote about, some 50 years ago about, a more just and caring, world. And so, let's do it one at a time.
We'll switch gears here because I think it's an important question. And that is, I think there may be a tendency for somebody to hear about servant leadership and think that it's effectively the same thing as philanthropy. And I'd love to get your observation on that. Is in fact servant leadership different from philanthropy, or if they're not the same, are they linked? What view, if any, do you have on the relationship between those two kind of conceptual frameworks?
Well, most often when I think of philanthropy, I think about, the big donors who are giving money to the various causes out there,
Right.
and so forth. And, I guess you could also say that there's, giving of one's time is philanthropic as well, but I think largely it's thought about as money. So, but if you include time or volunteering, and then you say, well, okay, then I think there are some crossover or some things that cross over into being a servant leader because you truly are serving and giving or helping others. But I don't think of servant leadership as of giving money.
Now you and I are both, as we've talked about, we're in a group that promotes and, for lack of a better term, I think in a way aggregates servant leadership. And there are others like that. Knights of Columbus and Kiwanis, and even to an extent Rotary Club, things of that nature. What do you think is the benefit of creating groups that are servant leaders, as opposed to individuals kind of going it alone?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, there's it's nice when you're with other like-minded people, and I think you learn from each other. I think there's inspiration that is shared, absorbed when you hear stories and see actions that I question, okay, can I up my game? What else can I do? How can I be better? And then I think it also sort of channels our energies or focus for some of the initiatives. So we, as you're aware, but the organization has an initiative called Inflection Point, where we're pulling a group of executives together to create an advisory board for a CEO on a short-term basis. Well, you're getting 4 or 5 people together to help that organization as opposed to just one-on-one. And so, and there's so much learning in one of those sessions. And I know you've been you led it for a while as well. So, but I think there's just so much that you take away as well as you give in those sessions. So, I think that's the benefit of being in a group.
And we're talking to Mark Bachmann on the discussion of becoming a servant leader, or the decision of whether to become a servant leader. And do you ever kind of think about or wonder about how do you measure, or how do you know that you're being effective? I mean, do you just sort of have a gut instinct? Is there anything that you monitor? I mean, again, I know you're a finance, you're a quantitative kind of guy. Have you ever given any thought to kind of measuring your effectiveness as a servant leader? And if so, what might your key performance indicators or KPIs look like?
Yeah, great question, and I haven't really gone to measure it other than sort of, and you mentioned this earlier about where you can get the self-validation because you don't necessarily get it externally. But how do you feel after you've worked with someone or helped someone out? So it's a lot of that self-reflection and feeling is how I've done it. You do get some positive accolades from time to time. I think, when I look back and the mentoring program that we have with Kennesaw State University in particular, I had a student a couple of years ago who we still stay in contact with, and to me that's a validation that I've really helped him, that he's been wanting and willing to continue. I'm not, he's reaching out to me, and we built a nice relationship as a result of that. So I know I've done some good and help in that regard.
So we're running up against our time limit, but I'm gonna squeeze a couple more questions in, and one of those kind of parting shots I want to get your thoughts on is, how has servant leadership changed, if at all, in this current coronavirus massive social upheaval / murder hornets environment? How does it, has it limited your ability to express it? Has it enhanced it? Has it put it on hold? Exposed the need? How has this environment kind of reframed your relationship with a servant leadership posture, if any?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a growing need for that. I think that in a crisis, depending on how severe and what the circumstances are, I mean, some people may sort of gravitate back to whatever their natural tendencies are, and if they were a servant leader before, they'll likely still think that way first. But I think there's clearly people who are in need, and so to the extent that some people have time, and I've had some time, so I've been able to do some things with some folks, not face to face, but through Zoom and through other means, to try to help them get through or counsel them.
Mark, this has been a great discussion, and as is often the case with these interviews, I learn a ton, which is what makes them so rewarding. I'm sure our listeners, at least some of our listeners, have questions about servant leadership and what it might mean in their particular situation or circumstances. Would you be willing to entertain a question from them if they wanted to contact you? And if so, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so they certainly can reach out to me through LinkedIn is fine, and I have contact information out there. Is probably the the best way to do it. And I'm certainly willing to have a conversation with them. And there's, if you really want to dive deeply into servant leadership, there is an organization called the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership that they could also follow up with.
Well, very good. That's going to wrap it up for today's program. I'd like to thank Mark Bachmann so much for joining us and sharing his expertise with us. We'll be exploring a new topic each week, so please tune in so that when you're faced with your next executive decision, you have clear vision when making it. If you enjoy these podcasts, please consider leaving a review with your favorite podcast aggregator. It helps people find us so that we can help them. Once again, this is Mike Blake. Our sponsor is Brady Ware & Company, and this has been the Decision Vision Podcast.